Alright, finally getting around to these dark elf cold ones. And we are starting with a very heavy dry brush of Vallejo Model Color Violet, which will be a good undercoat for our main base color. And as you can see, this goes on fairly thick because we want to cover up the majority of the black. And you could also notice I'm not going to the towel to wipe off any extra paint on the brush because this is a heavy dry brush. Now, using what is one of my main colors for the army, this is Vallejo Model Color Blue Violet. And this is going on slightly lighter than the previous Vallejo color, leaving some of the straight violet in the recesses. And now we move to a smaller brush, and we mixed up a lighter tone by mixing in some game color Wolf Grey into the blue violet, but so it doesn't become too chalky white. I also mixed in a little bit of Squid Pink, so there's still a bit of color into it. And as you can see, this is being a lot, it's being used a lot softer. Now, after all that, I need to spice things up, and so I am going back and painting in individual scales, starting off with a mix of blue violet and wolf's gray. And one good way to paint any sort of animal is you want a lot of variety in the skin tone, because animals are almost never one color. There's always some variety, and this really just makes an animal look a lot more interesting. So I'm just going with this mix and adding in different color scales wherever I feel like it, just here and there, some close to each other, some further apart, making it completely random. Now, after that's done, I'm repeating the process on different scales, this time with blue violet mixed with squid pink. Again, keeping a lot of variety into it. And initially, I was not planning on doing this little pebble pick out that much. Basically, once I started, I just couldn't stop. So a lot of that previous dry brushing does get covered up by this, but the dry brushing did help to sort of pick out some of the details, and this is kind of more like emphasizing them. Initially, I intended to be done at this point. However, what I wanted to do was highlight some of the scales, so I mixed in a bit of white with my blue, violet, pink mixture, and I was intending to just highlight the pink scales, but then I just started going forward and I started adding even more scales at this point. So highlighted some of the pink scales, but again adding a third color of scales at this point. And then we're not done yet, because now we're mixing in some blue for some real good variety, and that helps to tie into my other color scheme in the army, which is magic blue. So this is a mix of game color ultramarine blue, magic blue with a little bit of white, because my magic blue that I normally use is just a bit too stark for a living animal. And not too many of these being picked out, but just, again, adding more variety, and also adds my base color into it. Alright, that's done. Now we're going to work on the underbelly. So the underbelly is game color Sombre Grey, and for the first undercoat, I've mixed in some German black brown to darken it, but that made it too muddy, and so I had to add some Vallejo game color Stormy blue to make it blue again. And pay attention to the brush strokes here, because when it gets to the skin, I'm not going parallel with the skin, I'm going perpendicular with it, so it's not a stark cutoff. It's more of a random variety cutoff, and makes it a bit more realistic. And again, going perpendicular with the skin, now adding a little texture to it by using a bit thicker paint than I normally would, and just using a lot of stripes going back and forth to show some sort of, you know, wrinkled skin look, and adds more variety to the model. And for the highlights, simply mixing in that often used wolf gray again, and just repeating the process on just slightly smaller surface area on the edges to add a bit of highlight to that underbelly. skin and scales are done, so now turning into the horns and spikes and whatnot, and starting with a undercoat of German Camo Black Brown. And you can skip this step if you wish, if you want to be a little bit quicker. I always go the extra mile and add a darker color for more contrast. Also, I needed this color on all the leather, and so I decided to kill two birds with one stone and just painted all the spikes, the spines, and all the leather with this color. And over that German Camo Black Brown, starting with the spines, which we're base coating with some Vallejo Cobra Leather. And then to finish up the spines, just covering them with some game color bone color. And some of the bigger ones along the ridge will get one extra highlight by mixing in some white to the bone. But very easy, just a little spot of paint, no layering, no real dry brushing or anything you have to blend in, because the areas are so small, you can just use it basically right out of the bottle. And don't forget those toenails. The leather areas, very simple. I always use the same mix for leather. So starting with the undercoat of the Camo Black Brown, then comes the base coat of model color Flat Earth, then highlight that with the Cobra Leather, and then on the very tips with some game color Plague Brown. Very simple, unimaginative, and I'm sure I've mentioned it several times in previous videos, but it works. Now, in this instance, for some reason, my leather came out really chalky. I'm not sure if I just wasn't paying attention or something wrong with the paint. But rather than repainting it, all I'm going to do is put a heavy glaze of burnt umber over it. And that's going to soften the chalkiness of it. It's going to darken it slightly, but it's going to make the edges more subtle, and it really just fixes that issue, so no problem there. Onto the mouth, and I'm using Vallejo game color Warlock Purple mixed with a little Squid Pink, and it's a good match for this violet bluish creature I'm using, but you can use a wide variety of colors for gums and tongues. You can use reds, pinks, purples, blues. You do have a number of options, but I went with the purple in this case. I'm not a huge fan of like extreme cartoon contrast, going from black to white, but in the case of teeth, I make an exception. So going over the black undercoat using some pale sand to really make the teeth pop, because otherwise it just doesn't look right. And other than painting a few little bits and bobs, that is it for majority of the model. Just one of these final steps here, adding some magic blue to the reins. That's my secondary color for my army, and so I needed to get a little bit of blue into the cold ones. But other than that, just picking out a few areas in armor and a little bit of gold, and that is it. And there we are, got 5 cold ones done. Not the riders yet, because they need a bit of conversion work, but at least the mounts are complete, and we got a nice little mixed up pebble skin look, which is not that hard. I mean, I'm sure if you hear, oh my god, painting each individual scale sounds like a lot of work, it goes really fast because it's just one dot with your brush, just repeated over and over, but it goes pretty quick, so don't be afraid to do that. And other than all, just painting 5 models went fairly fast. Again, pebble skin went really quick. It's over a Drybrush undercoat, so that takes minutes. The underbelly, since I was using thicker paint and using a textured pattern, again, very quick. You know, painting the leather actually in the metal took longer than painting the other parts of the model. But give this a shot on your other pebbly type scaled creatures, or you can actually use this technique on flat skin too if you want to create some texture, some freckles or whatnot. But that is it. And as always, thanks for watching.